His signature is barely legible. Guy Fawkes tries to write his name on the confession November 8th. Yi Chen Liu Bai Ling Wu. Tower of London, but his hand shakes so violently the letters look like a child's scrawl. Compare this to his bold, confident signature from just 5 days earlier, before they put him on the rack. The transformation tells you everything about what happened in that torture chamber. His shoulders have been dislocated. His wrists can barely hold the quill. The professional torturer operating the rack knew exactly how many turns would break a man's ability to write while keeping him conscious enough to confess. This is torture as professional craft, not chaotic sadism, but calculated technique developed over centuries. Taught to specialists. Documented in manuals. Operating through legal procedures. Welcome to the darkest corners of institutional violence, where human cruelty became science. Today, we're examining 25 torture methods spanning from 7th century BCE Assyria through 1974 Spain over to 600 years of systematic brutality. And we're not cataloging horror for shock value. We're extracting survival lessons because understanding how torture operates as statecraft, how it's justified, professionalized, documented, and eventually delegitimized helps you recognize when contemporary systems employ similar mechanisms. The specific tools changed. The underlying patterns remain disturbingly consistent. Let's start with a method that shows how torture becomes public theater, and why spectacular violence often reveals regime vulnerability rather than strength. Number 1. Ling Qi death by 1,000 cuts. China Tang Dynasty through 1905. The last documented victim was Fu Zuli, executed in Beijing in 1905 for murder. Foreign reporters and Chinese officials witnessed the execution in what had become highly staged public ritual. The condemned was tied to wooden frame in public square. Small pieces of flesh were slowly cut away, sometimes hundreds of cuts, while crowds watched. In some cases, victims were strangled partway through to shorten suffering. In others, they were kept alive longer, depending on crime severity or crowd's appetite. But here's what matters. Beyond the physical, horror Ling Qi attacked the soul as much as the body. Chinese belief systems emphasized needing intact body for afterlife. So this punishment destroyed not just the person, but their eternal existence. The cuts fragmented both flesh and spiritual integrity. This method persisted for nearly 900 years, not because Chinese culture was uniquely cruel, but because the system served multiple state purposes, demonstrating authority's power over life and death, creating public spectacles that bonded communities through shared witnessing of violence, teaching lessons about consequences of transgression, and destroying enemies so completely they couldn't threaten authorities even in afterlife. The professionalization is key. Executioners trained in precise cutting techniques. Legal frameworks specifying which crimes warranted Ling Qi. Official documentation of procedures. This wasn't chaos. It was systematic institutional violence operating through established protocols. Survival lesson. The most dangerous torture isn't the most painful, it's the most systematized. Professional torture sustained by institutions operates independently of individual cruelty or mercy, making it far more threatening than random violence. Number 2. Drawing and quartering. England 1283 1880. David A.P. Gruffydd became first-person sentenced to this in 1283 for rebelling against King Edward I. The full process dragged through streets behind horse-drawn. hanged until nearly dead, but cut down conscious, disemboweled while watching your own intestines removed and burned, castrated, beheaded, body quartered into 4 parts displayed in different cities. This wasn't execution, it was political theater designed to fragment both body and any potential for martyrdom. But here's what's crucial. By 1660, when Major General Thomas Harrison received same sentence for helping execute King Charles I, witnesses reported he smiled as they tore his chest open. That composure, maintaining dignity while suffering maximum brutality, began turning spectacle against executioners. When victims refused to break publicly, the torture loses its lesson-teaching power. The method was legally abolished in 1870, but had essentially stopped being used decades earlier. Why? Because it backfired. Spectacular executions that shocked even supporters generated sympathy for victims rather than fear of authority. The survival lesson: sometimes enduring worst cruelty without breaking accomplishes more than submission, because it exposes regime brutality in ways that delegitimize persecutors. Harrison's smile haunted those who watched. It suggested that authorities needed such elaborate violence because they'd already lost the moral argument. Number 3. Flaying alive. Neo-Assyrian Empire, 934 to 609 BCE. King Sennacherib's conquest of Lachish in 701 BCE was documented in stone carvings still displayed in British Museum. His soldiers captured enemy leaders and flayed them skin peeled off systematically in front of their own people. The king didn't hide this. He bragged about it in royal inscriptions carved into palace walls. "I flayed as many nobles as had rebelled against me, and draped their skins over the pile of corpses. Some I spread out within the pile, some I erected on stakes upon the pile." This wasn't private sadism, it was public policy documented in official state archives. The flayed skins were nailed to city gates, hung from towers, wrapped over rock piles like trophies. The message defying Assyrian authority results in total destruction. But here's the survival lesson. When regimes document their brutality in official records carved in palace walls, recorded in state archives, photographed for propaganda, they're creating evidence that will eventually condemn them. Short term, documentation serves intimidation. Long term, it becomes permanent testimony against them. This pattern repeats across history: Assyrian inscriptions, Inquisition trial records, Nazi concentration camp documentation. Authorities recording violence believe they're demonstrating power. They're actually preserving crimes for future judgment. Number 4. Crucifixion. Ancient world through 4th century CE. After Spartacus's slave revolt in 71 BCE, Rome lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crosses bodies stretched for miles as permanent territorial markers. This wasn't execution for individual crimes, but mass demonstration of Roman power. The method relied on simple components: wooden beam, nails, or ropes. Gravity. Death came slowly, not from wounds, but from body giving out. Legs weakened. Lungs collapsed. Sometimes days. We have archaeological proof, the heel bone of Yehohanan, found in Jerusalem, with nails still embedded. Romans used crucifixion like billboard. Every traveler saw consequences of defying authority. It was routine, not exceptional. Carthaginians used it. Persians used it. Rome just perfected the theater. Eventually abolished around 4th century CE, partly because Christianity became state religion. making the execution method that killed their founder theologically problematic. This teaches crucial lesson. Systematic violence often ends not through moral awakening, but through changing political or religious configurations, making previously acceptable practices newly awkward. The survival lesson. Understanding what would make current brutal practices disadvantageous to authorities helps identify potential leverage points for change. Number 5. The rack. Europe through 1800s. Wooden frame with ropes and crank. Victim tied by wrists and ankles. Pulled in opposite directions until joints dislocated. Guy Fawkes. Caught in gunpowder plot of 1605. Left shaky signature as evidence of his time on the rack. Interrogators wanted names. Plots. Confessions. They weren't worried about scars because torture was legal. Documented. Official procedure. In France and Spain. Same pattern. Some victims couldn't walk afterward. Some never spoke again. The rack earned reputation became known as Duke of Exeter's daughter in Tower of London like it was living entity. People confessed to anything, true or false, just to make it stop. But here's the survival lesson hidden in that shaky signature. Guy Fawkes' destroyed handwriting became evidence against his torturers. The very documentation authorities required signed confessions, proving legal propriety, also proved coercion. When you see interrogation systems requiring signed statements, written confessions, documented proceedings, recognize that this documentation can eventually be used against the regime. Not immediately, but historical records of torture ultimately condemn those who create them. Number 6. Breaking wheel. Europe through 1841. In 1589 Germany, Peter Stump was tied to wooden wheel and accused of being werewolf. Yes, that's in actual court records. Executioners used iron bars to systematically shatter his limbs. Each strike was calculated. They had charts documenting how many blows bodies could endure before death. Some victims were left twisted on wheels, raised up as human warning signs. The method persisted for centuries, France still using it in 1700s when Voltaire wrote about it. Why? Because it worked not as justice but as fear. Nobody forgets sound of breaking bones in public square. But persistence into 1841, well into industrial age, reveals crucial pattern. Modernity doesn't guarantee humane treatment. Systems can industrialize, democratize, scientifically advance while maintaining barbaric punishment practices. The survival lesson: never assume your era's progress eliminates brutality. Old cruelties coexist with new technologies. Understanding this prevents dangerous complacency. Number 7. Strapado. Spanish Inquisition through Ottoman Empire. Hands tied behind back. Rope over pulley. Victim hoisted up. Sometimes dropped and jerked before hitting floor. Gravity dislocated shoulders. Torre ligaments. Exposed nerves. Galileo Galilei faced this in 1633. He recanted everything immediately. This wasn't cowardice, it was strategic calculation that submission might preserve his life for future work. And it did. Galileo lived another 9 years under house arrest, continuing research that would eventually vindicate his theories long after Inquisition lost power. The survival lesson. Sometimes tactical submission accomplishes more than heroic resistance when you're calculating long-term impact rather than immediate dignity. Galileo's recantation looked like defeat, but preserved the person who would ultimately prove heliocentrism correct. Strategic surrender when facing inevitable torture can protect what matters most, your capacity to continue work that outlasts your persecutors. Number 8. Water torture. Waterboarding. Spanish Inquisition through modern CIA. Simple setup, cloth over face. Water poured continuously. Brain registers drowning. Panic overwhelms. This dates to Spanish Inquisition, but modern times brought it to CIA black sites after 2001. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 183 times. The debate is, torture reveals how authorities use semantic games to maintain practices while denying brutality. Earlier forms forced victims to drink water until stomachs burst. China. Japan. Europe all used variations. But modern waterboarding's significance isn't the method, it's the bureaucratic language disguising it. Enhanced interrogation. Stress positions. Sleep deprivation. When torture gets rebranded with clinical terminology, you're seeing authorities trying to legitimize practices they know are indefensible. The survival lesson. Pay attention to euphemistic language around coercion. When governments develop elaborate vocabulary to avoid saying torture, they're revealing they understand what they're doing is wrong, but plan to continue anyway. The linguistic gymnastics are admission of guilt disguised as legal precision. Number 9. Garrote. Spain, through 1974. Metal collar attached to post. Condemned sits with neck in ring. Executioner turns screw from behind. Crushing windpipe or snapping neck. This persisted as Spain's official execution method until 1974, just 51 years ago. Salvador Puig Antich, young activist, was executed this way under Franco's dictatorship. His last words were published in newspapers. The shocking modernity teaches crucial lesson. Cultural practices can persist decades past when surrounding societies abandon them. Geographic and political factors matter enormously. Just because most of Europe moved away from capital punishment doesn't mean all of Europe did. The survival lesson: never assume your location has adopted prevailing contemporary standards. Always investigate actual laws, actual practices, actual recent cases. Cultural lag is real and potentially deadly. What's illegal in neighboring regions may be standard procedure where you are. Number 10. Keel hauling. Byzantine times through Dutch Navy, 1600s, 1800s. Sailor tied to rope. Dragged under ship from one side to other. Barnacles cut like knives. Many drowned. Survivors emerged covered in lacerations. In 1672, Dutch Admiral Jan van Ness ordered his surgeon keel-hauled in front of entire fleet. Artists even painted the event capturing horror and spectacle for posterity. This persisted for centuries because naval environments are isolated and authoritarian with no external accountability. At sea, captain's authority is absolute. The survival lesson: confined environments where authority operates without oversight ships. Prisons. Remote facilities. Closed institutions are most dangerous. When you're considering positions isolating you from external accountability structures, understand your safety depends entirely on those in immediate power. No appeals. No witnesses. No escape. The calculation must be different than in societies with multiple power centers and accountability mechanisms. Number 11. Scalping. Colonial North America. native tribes and European colonists both took scalps. But governments weaponized it through bounty systems. Massachusetts paid $50 per scalp, sometimes more. This policy created market for violence. Missionary accounts from 1700s describe French